Alright, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today we're going to be doing some other stuff, not really talking too much about the presidential election because I don't want to be too much of a broken record and just repeat a ton on, well, Biden's up in polling, but I'm a little bit leery of trusting the top line results 100% because they're weighting based off of census data and not expected turnout. And there's then there's a ton of other stuff going on in this nation. Seattle has a whole autonomous zone thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about, and there's been some SCOTUS news because of course there has been, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today is the SCOTUS decisions, and really just two of the SCOTUS decisions, but also the decision it's called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or I'm going to say CHAZ for short, just because, God, it actually makes me hate it with that acronym, CHAZ. Like, come on, really? Also, I love how this is just borked. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start with SCOTUS, and the first one is that LGBT rights have been codified in the 1964 anti-discrimination stuff as part of equal protection under the law. And people are complaining about, especially, conservatives and a lot of super social conservatives are complaining about the ruling because Gorsuch and Roberts joined the liberal wing of the court and saying that this isn't the originalism that Gorsuch supposedly espouses. But I actually decided to read the opinion, and I thought it was good. And we have to recognize a few things. Gorsuch is fairly libertarian on a lot of things. That's why he joins the liberals more often than, say, Kavanaugh and some of his decisions look erratic for supposedly conservative justice. And this isn't fitting with his libertarianism, at least in some regards, because the idea is that he wants to ensure that people are protected and able to live their lives as they see fit. One could argue this is an expansion of government because it is expanding the authority of a law passed in 1964 to include something that wasn't really considered a thing back in 1964. However, I think his logic is sound, and seriously, read the opinion that he lists out, and he basically explains that he's not necessarily subscribing to the idea that gender and sexuality are a spectrum, but he is stating that just because a person like him in power doesn't view it that way, and maybe I'm kind of reading into some of the way he explains some things, but this is the way I take his argument to basically mean, is that just because one person doesn't view something one way and another person views something another, and that there is no 100% correct position, at least again, you can argue that there is a 100% correct position, but he is trying to operate in an unbiased manner, in such a way that there is no 100% correct position, that we need to allow maximum freedom So he expanded protections under the law for certain individuals, and I think that's fair. I think that is fair. Okay? The second one is a decision by the Supreme Court that I am very unhappy with, that I am very displeased about. And the only justification I can think for not hearing the gun cases, 10 of them, including some very severe restrictions on a person's rights to not just keep arms, but also bear them. And I say this is, concealed carrier. I say this is a gun owner. I say this is somebody who has studied the history of firearms ownership in the United States, studied the historical context of the Second Amendment, as well as the historical context of gun ownership in the United States of America. Not hearing these cases, while it isn't saying that it's permissible to allow these draconian, unconstitutional, and tyrannical restrictions, as well as racist for reasons, historical. In my eyes, not hearing these cases, while not saying it's okay to implement them, it delays the judgment on them. And the reason why I say the only justifiable reason for Gorsuch, I want to say Kennedy, Thomas, and Kavanaugh, I'm trying to remember, because I believe the liberal wing is, no, it's Alito, sorry, Samuel Alito. I flipped Kennedy and Alito, and that's a mistake. The only reason for the conservative justices not to hear this case would be they're worried that Roberts might side with the liberal wing and say, no, these laws are permissible. And I don't like these. I don't like any of these cases. And this is basically allowing states to go even further and further and further into the, well, we're going to take away your guns, or we're going to prevent you from buying a gun that you want just because we think it's scary. And I'm at some point going to do a history of guns in the United States, and trust me, I'm going to really hammer after gun control, because it is not a pleasant policy. It is not a net positive. It is a racial policy meant to disenfranchise those who are not white of their political rights. And you can say, well, what? And I'm going to explain why that hasn't changed since the days of Jim Crow. But anyway, let's move on to the weird in political news and talk about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, or, as I like to say, the Virgin CHAZ versus the CHAD. I'll explain that joke in a little bit. And I wish I had an image for that. I might actually make one because I think it's that hilarious. And I may make that the thumbnail. Just because I think it's brilliant. Anyway, so the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was a zone created by a mix of protesters and looters in the Capitol Hill neighborhood in Seattle. And for anybody saying that looters and rioters were not part of this group, number one, you're wrong, because if it was just protesters, the East Precinct of the police, the police department, wouldn't have retreated from the area. Yeah. They then erected barriers and barricades entering the area of the city that they controlled and put up signs declaring what they were, but also signs stating that they are leaving, that if you're crossing that point, you are now leaving the United States. They then implemented, then a bunch of people started actually enforcing these border checkpoints. And they supposedly got rid of the police, though that's not entirely the case. And they do have a city park where people are growing food and where a bunch of porta potties are that have been provided by the city of Seattle. It's funny. They think of themselves as autonomous, and yet they're completely dependent on the rest of Seattle in order to survive. Yeah, it's kind of funny. They also are the same people protesting, complaining about protesting and rioting against police brutality, or just because they want some free shit. And these are the same people who complain about the idea of a border wall and strongly enforced borders being all sorts of horrible things, yet within a week they've established a police state with very strong borders and a border wall. Nice. The other... That said, there is a very interesting take in that open carry and firearms ownership seems to actually be 100% accepted within this area. And I actually think that's a positive. So, but I don't think this is going to last very long. I think it's going to collapse the second any real crisis hits the area. The city of Seattle is also providing medical tents, and Seattle's police department and other emergency services claim to be operating within the area, or at least able to go into the area. That said, they have also reported that it's difficult to do so, we'll see. But anyway, if I was, say, the governor of Seattle, basically I'd say, okay, you can operate as your own country. That said, you're going to have to play by the rules of other nations. And I say, and I'd also make them pay for anything that they get from the city of Seattle or Washington State. Sounds fair, right? That way, they can operate a society as they see fit, and watch it inevitably collapse when it can't sustain itself. And they can get a very practical and real life lesson in why you need police, why you need trade, why you need free markets, and why you need other emergency services. But, that's just how I'd handle it. It'd be a non-violent, peaceful solution. And because the area would collapse so quickly, it wouldn't spark other areas to do the same, I don't think, because at the end of the day, this is a fairly unique thing to Seattle, in my opinion. Other places just aren't going to do it because other police departments aren't that crazy. Other cities aren't that crazy. But anyway, the reason why I said that there's a hilarious meme that I can make about it, based off of the Virgin versus Chad meme. The Virgin CHAZ has no lakes, complete concrete jungle, can't sustain itself, has a border wall, and no real wildlife to speak of. Versus the CHAD has a glorious lake that's name literally translates to lake in their own language. The nation is named after that lake. They have tons of amazing, beautiful wildlife, no border wall, beautiful nature, can sustain itself. And also has a pretty awesome flag, even if it is a copy of Romania's. Yeah, I mean, come on. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.